Get started writing Go by downloading it from go.dev. You can download it from Mac, Linux or Windows, whatever takes your fancy. I'm also going to be using the VS Code editor, which is going to simplify a lot of the things in this tutorial, so make sure to download that as well, or use your favorite code editor of choice. Inside of VS Code, we're going to look for the Go extension. This is going to give us all the syntax highlighting, and it's actually going to make the formatting a little bit easier as well. Now, with Go installed, we're going to start out by writing our first Hello World program. So create a new file, call it main.go, but you can call it whatever you want. And inside of here, the first thing we need to write is package. If you're familiar with Java, packages will make great sense to you. What packages do is bundle your code into sort of like a library. And in this case, you need to create a package.main because this is going to be our entry point. Then we're going to have all of the imports inside of our Go file. And in here, you can import any libraries that you like. In my case, I'm going to import the FMT library. And you can write imports in many different ways. If you've got a bunch of different imports, you can list them all out over here. And if you've just got one import, it might simplify it to put it all on one line by just saying import FMT. The next thing that we'll need to do is we'll need to define our entry point. So we'll say func main, and just like with a lot of different programming languages, the main function is the entry point to the program. And to print out hello world, you do fmt.print line, and you can put whatever you want here. And now, in my case, I'm going to say hello world. Notice that in Go, you can end your lines with a semicolon at the end. However, this is not needed. And in fact, when I press Control Save, which will format our code in a standardized Go way, it's actually going to remove the semicolon for us. So now, if we want to run the code, we can open up our console and type in Go, run, and then dot to specify our own directory. And there we go, we've got Hello World printed into the console. Go is a functional program, so naturally the next thing for us to talk about is functions. Functions are a way to bundle your code into small little packages inside your files. So for example, I can have a function called add, and I want it to take two arguments and add them together. So I'm going to say x, and then I have to specify the type that x is going to be, and y, and a type for it as well. The last thing that I want to do is specify the return type of this function, and I'm just going to return another integer. So I'm going to say int at the end of it. And now we can do return x add y, and if we want to call the function below, we can just say add and 1 2. So now when we run the code, we've got 3 printed out to the console. You may want to simplify your functions a little bit. So if both of the parameters have the same type, what you can do is actually get rid of the type of the first one and just specify the type at the end. If you want to return multiple results from a function, you can put the return type in parentheses. And in here, we can return another number at the end. And you can see VS Code highlights this for us because we're meant to be returning 2 integers and not just 1. So what we can do is return x and then followed by a comma and then say y, or we can add x and y together and return y as a second parameter. So now when we run this code, you can see that we get 2 numbers back. We get x plus y and then y on its own. Sometimes you may have a function that looks a little bit like this. So it takes 1 parameter and returns 2 values back. But we can actually simplify it a little bit and have the variables defined at the top of the function sort of by Go. And the way we do that is we can get rid of this integer here, say x and then y, to again simplify the syntax a little bit. And this essentially is going to define 2 variables at the top, like so. So this is essentially what Go is going to do when we define the variables inside of here. It's going to create this line invisible to us, and then we can assign the variables over here. So let's just go back to what we had before. So you can see this function is going to take a sum as its argument, and then it's going to return 2 numbers, x and y, and we can simplify this again because both of them have the same return type. And we don't need to use the assign operator for the variables. We can simply set them equal to, because Go is going to create those variables for us in the background. And we don't need to specify that we need to return x and y in the return statement because that's automatically handled for us. So now when we run the code, you can see that you got 1 and 2 printed out to the console. Since we're handling integers and not floating point numbers, it's not accurate and it's going to round things up. But you get the point. We've touched on variables a little bit when we talked about functions, but now let's dive a little bit deeper with them. So you define a variable by saying var, then the variable name, like I, and then the type, which can be int, and then you define what you want to set it to. Now, it's still highlighting I as red because it's never used, and it's warning us against it. So we're just going to print it out by saying fmt print line I And there we go. So there's a lot of different ways of actually defining variables in Go. You can define multiple variables on one line, so I can have I and then j, and I may want to set j to 10 and then print it out to the console as well. But there is a shorthand for this. Instead of writing var every single time, you can actually get rid of the var keyword and put a colon over here, but then you can't define multiple variables on one line. So this is going to define a variable and set it to the number 5, and we don't even have to specify the type because the type is going to be inferred by Go. So this is implicitly setting the type to int. So let's talk about all the different types that are available in Go, because there's actually quite a few. So you can see in this comment which comments in Go you can create by either having a backslash and then a star, or using a double backslash for one-line comments. This is a multi-line comment, so using the star. So you've actually got bool, string, all of the different integers from 8 bits to 64 bits, unsigned int, pointer, bytes, and floats, and those are the most commonly used types inside of Go. So now let's do a little bit of work with the variables that we've got. So let's define a variable called I and set it to 5. So if we want to reassign the variable to a different number, we just use a normal equal sign, and now it's going to be 10. You can do a lot of basic arithmetic with variables. So if I define j to be 9, and then I want to add the two numbers together, I can use the plus equal sign for a shorthand. And this line below is essentially the same as saying I plus j, and that will add the two numbers together. So when we run the code, we get 14 as the output. So what if you want to create your own custom type? Let's say you want to represent a person inside of Go. So what might the person have? So we define a new type by using the keyword type, and then let's say person, and then struct at the end, and got to make sure to have the bracket in the same line, and then we can define all of the different variables that we want the person to have. For example, we want them to have a name with a type of string, we want them to have an age with a type of int, and then we can use the type below by saying person of type person. Then we can set all the different values for that person by saying person.name equals Bob and person.age equals 20, and we can print out or use the structure however we want to by printing out the name, for example. So now if we say go.run, we got Bob printing out to the console. So this is how you can define custom types inside of Go. So now let's talk about condition logic, which are if statements. So first let's define a variable. We can call that variable I, and we'll set it to 5. So if I is equal to 5, we might want to print out, we're going to print out howdy. And if I is equal to 2, we'll print out hello world. If it's not equal to 5 or 2, we're going to print out nope. So this is how if statements look inside of Go. You don't need the parentheses around your variables. So now if we run the code, we can see we've got howdy printing out to the console because I is equal to 5. You can of course have nested conditions inside, so I can have another if statement in here saying if true, because I just want this nested if statement to run. I'm going to say howdy partner, save that, rerun the code, and we see we got howdy and then partner printing out to the console. Let's move on to arrays. Arrays are a way of storing multiple values inside of one variable. You can define an array like so. So we use the keyword var and then array, and we'll set it to an array of integers. So use the keyword var, then specify the name of your array. Next you use the equal sign, and now you define how big you want your array to be. So arrays are fixed in size and they cannot change. So we'll say that this array is going to have 3 elements inside of it, and all of those elements are going to be of the same type, which is going to be integer, and we're just going to say 1, 2, 3. And let's quickly print this out to the console. So let's have a look at what this sort of looks like. So you can see an array is just in brackets, and it's a collection of different numbers. You can define an array in a different way as well by using a shorthand syntax and say array colon equals, and then again we can use the 3 over here, and this will do exactly the same thing. If you've got an array and you want it to change in size because you want to add numbers to it, you want to subtract stuff from it, you actually want a slice. Now a slice is similar to, let's say, a vector inside of C++ or a list inside of Python. It can dynamically change in size whilst your program is running. So the way to define a slice is very similar to an array. All you have to do is get rid of this number at the front, and your slice has been created. And just to prove that slices are dynamic and can change in size, I'll print out a slice over here, then I'll append an element to the slice by using the append method, and I'm going to say 4, and I'll print out the slice again. So now when we run the code, you can see that initially it has 3 elements inside of it, and then it has 4. Maps are another way of grouping your elements inside of one variable, but they actually come with a key and a value pair, sort of like dictionaries in Python or maps in pretty much any other language. So let's have a look how you would define a map. Again, you can use the var keyword, say a map, and then we're going to say that this is going to be a map with a key of string and a value of string as well. So now we can say name is going to be Bob or car, Ford. So when we want to get a value out of our map, we're going to say format, print line, and map, and then we're going to specify the key that we want to get. In this case, we just want to get a name, and I'm just going to rename the value of map because that is a horrible name. You should never use a reserved name as your variable name. So I'm just going to say this A and A name. So now when we run the code, you can see that we get the value of Bob from the map. There's another way of defining the map. Just like with arrays, we have a shorthand for this, and we can say an array is colon equal to, and in this case I'm going to give it integers, so name is 1, car is 2. So if we print B out to the console with the name, it should give us the number 1. So there you go, we get Bob and 1 printed out in the console. Now let's cover for loops. So if we want to loop over all of our elements in a map and we want to print out the key and the value pair, we can do so like this. We can say for, and then we're going to say key value equals to range of the map, which is going to be A, and we're going to print out both the key and value out to the console. What this for loop does is going to loop over all of the elements in our map, and it's going to set the key and value with each iteration of them, and we're going to print out each element to the console. So if we run this, you can see that we get name, and then Bob, and then car, and then Ford printed out to the console. If you want to loop over a number of elements inside of an array, or if you just want to loop over a couple of times, you can do a for loop like this. You can first set your variable that you want to begin with to 0. Then we specify a condition for how long you want to loop for. In our case, we want to loop 5 times. And then we want to specify a condition for what we want to do at the end of each iteration of the loop. And we're just going to print out all the 5 numbers to the console. And as you can see, we start at 0 and we go all the way until I is less than 5, and we get 5 numbers printed out to the console. Now you may be wondering, how do you do while loops inside of Go? Because Go doesn't actually have a while keyword. So the way to do it is use a for, and then you just put a double colon, and this is going to loop infinitely. So as you can see, this is an infinite loop, and that's how you can do while loops inside of Go. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.